Thank you for the presentation. It was very nice. As an anthropologist conducting research among migrants in Gurgaon, I found it very fascinating. But I'm particularly interested in knowing more about your research methodology, because collecting oral history, it's people talk, as you mentioned about that the Ola cab driver, and you met that person twice, but in certain conditions, in certain places. And how that informed their responses is something that you have to take into account. So I'm just very curious about where you met them, how many times you interviewed them. I know, as it's been said repeatedly, you'll be going again. But how did that shape the responses that you got? Because most of them are very, like this person was very, as you said, very particular about time and everything, very positive in that sense. But that's also because at one point you interviewed him around his workplace or something like that, or I'm probably confusing it.
At the institution we were affiliated at.
Oh, okay, okay.
Which happened to be close by.
Close by.
Where he lives.
Yeah, so I'm just curious about how that shaped your the responses and what kind of research was done. Thank you.
A very small question, which is that sometimes it seems that in some interviews the fact that people are migrant is a given. They are migrants, but when you talk about the manner in which they renegotiate, for instance, patriarchy, orientation, reorientation, how the fact that they are migrants affect that? Because if you were taking maybe someone who's doing the same profession, same economic background, but who's not a migrant, do you think that would play differently? So sometimes I don't know whether migrant is the cause or the leverage, or what triggers a change, or is maybe at times maybe it would make no difference in some of the phenomena that you notice. I don't know if it's clear, but.
Yeah, I can take that one.
Maybe I wanted to squeeze in and ask also one question related to the informal sector. As you mentioned, it was also histories of the informal sector migrants, and I felt that through particularly the story of Masoud, we moved from very informal sector activity. You mentioned tea selling at the beginning, to something which is a little bit more contract based, and even for his daughter, we're completely moving with a serial service person. So how is this relation with the informal sector also have been evolving in some of your interviews? Do you have already a few conclusions about that? That was the first question, sorry. But do you have more questions?
Thanks, Vicky and Karen. Fascinating. Quick questions, and both of them are speculative. Thank you. Looking forward to the kind of work you'll be doing. One is, people mentioned in passing this lady in Chandigarh, and it struck me about the notion of doing work in two cities. And the question as to whether working in two cities automatically meant working in two places or not. Because if you're talking about somebody who took in a Punjabi household in Delhi and a Punjabi household in Hyderabad, does it really matter that you're in Delhi? So in what sense does your work in these two cities affect the way you think about place? And the second is the other side. I mean, a lot of your description of these persons involves their relationships back with the village. And while Sharad's work is about how the village travels to the city, I'm just curious about how in your own work, as you take this forward, how will the city travel to the village? And how exactly are you planning to address that kind of stuff?
we may start here with the question, and then of course we can continue the debate after the workshop. Yes.
So thank you for asking the research methodology question. So, I think the location of the interviews mattered immensely. We the space of the cab and the space of the auto were wonderful spaces for me to be doing ethnographic research. There's something about that space where people talk. So every day I have wonderful conversations with a lot, with a lot of people. And then it also really mattered, when we first began interviews in Hyderabad, we did some interviews in the office. And they were fine, but they bombed. So let me just be honest about it. Those are just not simply as rich as they could have been. After that, we got ourselves out and we just began to, talk to people either where they were working or where they were dwelling. And certainly in Delhi, Lucky and Sunil have been just wonderful in terms of their own contacts with people. So I'll let them talk a little bit about where they live and their contacts with people, because the richness of the Delhi interviews is because of them. So I should let them talk about it, and only to say then that we're very aware of this kind of double hermeneutic, right? That we are producing the kind of things that people think they want to hear us say about their own lives, and I don't think there's any way out of that really. We went back 3 and 4 times with some of the interviewees. And this is the fictions of ethnography, right? That we finally got 2, 3, 4 different stories, because when you went back and looked at the transcript and there was something that didn't match up and you went back and asked, then you got a whole set of other explanations. Or actually now another story itself. And then the interesting thing becomes, so why did, what happened with the first story, what's the second story about, and how do people actually want to tell their own stories in different ways at different times. So I think just keeping. That's right. Yeah. So one of these people who I went back and interviewed like 3 or 4 times in Hyderabad. I first interviewed her in her home, and then I interviewed her in her neighbor's home, and the fact that we were chatting with each other for 3 or 4 hours really got her into trouble with her mother-in-law, who kept coming and interrupting. And then I had said I would say bye before I left, and I walked right into this big family fight about what it is she had been telling me. And then she was mouthing off what she wanted me to tell the mother-in-law she had been telling me, which was how nice her husband was and how nice her mother-in-law was. So, people play you all the time, and I think we all just let ourselves be played.
दिल्ली में हमारे मतलब इंटरव्यूज़ की शुरुआत जो उसमें मतलब एक तो सुनील के बहुत सारे संपर्कों की वजह से, ख़ास तौर पे बादली में जहाँ से हमने शुरुआत की दिल्ली वाले फेज़ की, और खुद सुनील बादली उसके एक्टिविज़म और पॉलिटिकल पार्टिसिपेशन की वजह से बादली, नया गांव और अली गांव एक उस तरह के जहाँ पे उनका पहले से संपर्क था, और वो उनके साथ एक जो रिलेशनशिप था और उसके थ्रू फिर वो हम लोगों को कैसे लोग मिले, एक वो तो एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण, क्योंकि एक तो जगह का तो मामला है कि आप कहाँ बैठ के बात करते हैं, पर ओरल हिस्ट्रीज़ और अपनी ज़िंदगी की कहानियाँ कहने के लिए वो विश्वास एक कि आपके साथ बात हो सके, वो एक रिश्ता बनाने का एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण चीज़ है। तो वो उसमें मतलब हम लोग या सिविल लाइंस वाले जगह पे ऑलरेडी मतलब हम लोग के संपर्क थे, और फिर उसके ज़रिए या लाल गुंबद बस्ती में प्रीति ने अपने संपर्क से वो बनाना शुरू किया। फिर धीरे धीरे हमने अपना एक, और सिर्फ ये कि हमने ये सेलेक्ट करके कि ये इंटरव्यूज़ हैं उस तरीके से नहीं, कई लोगों से, मतलब जो इंटरव्यूज़ अभी ओरल हिस्ट्रीज हैं या की इन्फॉर्मेंट्स हैं, वो ये नहीं है कि सिर्फ उन्हीं, ये लिस्ट में जो है उससे ज़्यादा नंबर लोगों से हमारी बातचीत हुई, लेकिन उससे कॉन्टिन्यूसली एक रिश्ता बनाना, लाइक वी हैव अ रिकॉर्डिंग, लाइक पुतली है, वी हैव अ अराउंड 6 hour रिकॉर्डिंग, बट वी हैव इन्फॉर्मेशन मोर देन दैट, बिकॉज उससे ज़्यादा मिलना, उसके काम की जगह, उसकी लड़ाई की जगह, लड़ाई मतलब जब वो निकाले गए, फिर उसके बच्चे के बारे में चिंता पे बातचीत, और बहुत सारी जो रिकॉर्डेड ही नहीं है कहीं भी, या बाहर पे सब्जी लेने जाते हुए, मुझे सब्जी लेने जाना है उसके घर से आते हुए कि अच्छा मुझे सब्जी लेते, तो वो मुझे वहाँ लेके गई, तो उस तरह की चीज़ें, और वो जिससे कि एक उसका अपना भी, अच्छा आप यहाँ से ले सकते हो, बार्गेन करना, एक रिलेशनशिप वो बनाना, तो वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण, क्योंकि जिस तरह के डिटेल्स पुतली के जीवन के या हैदराबाद के भी कई इंटरव्यूज़ हैं हमारे पास, जिस तरह के लाइफ के डिटेल्स बोले, और कास्ट का जहाँ पे वर्क के साथ रिलेशनशिप है, उसी तरह कास्ट और पेट्रियार्की का अपनी वो इंटीमेट इन्फॉर्मेशन के बारे में ओपन अप होने का जो है, वो भी वो स्पेस के साथ तो है, जो एक एग्जाम्पल उन्होंने दिया, उसके अलावा रिलेशंस का भी है कि कैसे वहाँ से आप रिश्ते बनाते हैं, वो एक फ़र्क पड़ा दिल्ली वाले इंटरव्यूज़ में हम लोग।
And just one thing I think that this phenomenological thing did was that when we were sitting around and preparing for this presentation, we were actually doing it retrospectively, right? So, I mean, I think all of us as ethnographers know, right? It's always retrospective, and it's always in collaboration with the people you're talking to, because they're helping you to understand what they told you. But in this case, it was really interesting that this kind of move to the phenomenological made us actually sit and think about, you know, what was the body language, what was our body language, how was space being negotiated, you know, how does Mehboob Ali's space, which we went to his home, you know, become this different space of the family. So it was really retrospectively that especially these kind of ideas of the body and the space and how that gets inhabited was layered on to the work of the human.
Questions from Mahi Helen about migrants are not informal sector. Mahi Helen, could you just elaborate on your question? I don't fully recall it.
What I'm saying is some aspects of the case studies that you were discussing, for instance, Malika's ability to maybe use some of the skills to professionalize a profession. How would the fact that she's a migrant differ from someone who would come from the same caste but who has been living in the city, who is not a migrant, be different? So sometimes it's very clear what the migrant, I would say, indicator, let's say, does to the oral histories. But sometimes, whether it's migrant or not, would it make a difference? Not sure it's clear, you know. But like if you imagine in an equation, you use migrant as a proxy, but sometimes it seems that maybe migration would not play a role. So, or would it play a role? So.
I think that's absolutely right, and one of the things that we haven't done, for instance, is in our pool of oral histories we have some number of second generation migrants who grew up in the city, who therefore have a somewhat ambivalent relationship to what their parents call home. For them, both home as well as their aspirations in terms of occupational aspirations, educational aspirations, the kinds of social norms that they are willing to embrace or not embrace are different. And we have, of course, anecdotal evidence, but I think if we were to actually systematically read through our transcripts, we would be able to answer this somewhat more forcefully. In terms, but I think you're absolutely right that when you have second or third generation of migrants, the way in which they live the city, way in which they inhabit the city, and they imagine the possibilities and constraints of the city quite different from what their parents. I mean, this is almost, I think, a truism. So absolutely, I think that's right, and it would be very interesting to actually explore this. And this is interconnected to the question that was previously posed about, whether this is the caste segmentation of urban labor markets. Is this intergenerational or not, or what aspects of this are intergenerational, right? There may be, for instance, the aspect that Lucky was bringing up about how even today sewage workers remain, for the most part, Balmikis. So that's a certain kind of relationship that has persisted intergenerationally, which is troubling. But then that's one thing to say troubling, another thing to try and understand why that is the case. And Lalit Batra, who is not here, has been working on precisely this question. So I'll just leave it at that. I think this question of caste segmentation and how the intergenerational deviations from caste-based occupations is an important one. I mean, anecdotally, I'll just very briefly say that we have this instance of a second generation migrant who realizes belatedly, because one of his Brahmin friend chides him that you're a Harijan. But until then, he has not really embraced that as a part of his identity in the city. It's something that has been completely effaced for him, perhaps willfully by his parents, and then he goes back to his father and asks, what does this mean? This is when he's in 10th grade, in school, 8th to 10th grade. And he does better than his friend. He's actually quite good academically and goes on to college and so on. But out of resentment, his friend kind of taunts him. So anyhow, I'll just leave it at that.
I think the questions of trajectories out of the informal sector is something that we've been toying with, and it seems like an awfully large number of people come in and work as helpers or as chai boys, or for women it's domestic service, right? Those are the kinds of things where the barriers to entry are low, and people enter in, and of course helping is a form of mentorship, right? So very often people are very generous with allowing somebody to be a helper and working for free or very little wages, but in the process they really learn the skill, and then they become skilled people at whatever that occupation is, whether it's being a melter or being learning how to cook, becoming a really good bawarchi and so on. I don't think we've yet figured out, and this is something that we keep thinking about, why it is that certain individuals are able to do this and others are not, right? Because it does seem to be the case from our oral histories that there are some individuals who really make a go of it. There are the Masoods of the world, there are the Malikas of the world, and we've got lots of these cases which are really inspiring, with how little people come in with and what little resources they have, and then what they make of themselves and their lives and their children. But I don't think at this point, we have enough to go on to say that these are the kind of particular trajectories that people take. I mean, there are some people who we feel really sad because we know they'll be chai boys for the rest of their lives. And there are other chai boys who have already become mobile phone operators, or, they've done something else. And there are some people who, just take the risk of shifting drastically from cleaning floors to setting up a tea point somewhere, right? And then from the tea point to a tiffins, and from a tiffins to something else, right? So there are those kinds of and I think it's a valid question. And then your question of whether this can be still considered informal sector work or not is a really good one, right? Because of course Ola and Uber and so on are under conditions of which are very, very different to being the chai boy.
So if somebody is self-employed as a self-contracting with Ola or Uber, where do we peg them? And this is a troubling question. I mean, I think we encounter this all the time, which is what is formal, what is informal. partly because the lines are becoming so blurred. So we have the case of Ehsan, whom Sunil presented, right? He's a class 4 employee in Igman. And at the same time, he's been contractually hired. And
Daily wage.
he's hired as a daily wager. He's been working there the last 10 years.
10 years.
He's a daily wager. Is he formal or is he informal? Right? We don't know. And partly this is revealing the clunkiness of the whole formal informal dichotomy, and how we then form policy initiatives for the formal or the informal sector. More broadly, what is it that we seek in terms of employment stability and security.
So, Parthu, thanks for those great questions, and I think we really need to think about this more. The kind of criteria of selection for Delhi and Hyderabad were as idiosyncratic as I belong to Hyderabad and Vinay belongs to Delhi. And we thought we could do this. At one point, we thought there's more than enough to do in just one city. But then, we also realized that the way these cities have been shaped and changed, the ways in which the built environment has changed, the ways in which the places that are available for bastis have changed, are in fact very different. And that is at one level of abstraction. And then how people themselves make sense of being in a particular city, like I was trying to suggest with the woman who thought Chandigarh was a place where there were Punjabi low, is also very different. So I think that there are several levels really of why and how the city matters that we are going to have to think through more carefully. I don't think at this point, what we do realize is that simply setting up Delhi and Hyderabad or choosing them is insufficient to make any kind of robust argument about place and how that matters. And I think that we are in the process of teasing out at what layers of abstraction this matters and how that is the case.
And I think the question which you anticipate, which is how does the city travel back to the village? In some ways we are not in a position to answer that, because that is precisely the second phase of the research. We try to elicit this by asking in the oral histories about how people remember the village, what is their memory of first arriving in the city, how do they feel when they go back to the village, in particularly the village and the city as different sensoria, different sights, different sounds, different smells, different ways in which the body is relates to spaces, and so on, different sites, and it's not just that. I mean, I think there is increasing. Well, Preeti can speak a little bit more to this, but right, I think we've gone through a phase, at least in academia, where first, at least until the 1990s or so, development was all about agrarian studies and village studies and so on and so forth, and then we had the urban turn, and for the last 20 years we've been basically enmeshed in the urban turn. But increasingly now I think there's a recognition that the rural and the urban really are so interlocked and so enmeshed that it's not possible to think about the two in mutual isolation, that we really need to have frameworks which allow us to think about them in this kind of interdigitated relationship, how the village travels to the city and causes certain or provokes certain forms of, whether it's labor market segmentation or whether it's certain dynamics of habitation in the city, or how by the same token the city travels back to the village and shapes the imaginations of people, but also in how it's materially affecting land-labor relationships in the village, right? So there is some evidence, again, regionally variable, which suggests that in some instances there is a process of deproletarianization occurring, where people have been able to use some of their savings in the cities to actually accumulate some amount of land in the villages, which suggests that their imagination is at least to some extent still located in the village. One of the things we've been struck by, in fact, is and again, this comes back to your question about why do you really need to do two cities? But again, on the basis of the provisional kind of evidence that we've been able to elicit from the transcripts, that at least in Delhi, that association to the village remains extremely strong. It seems a little more tenuous in Hyderabad, and this is a conversation we've had before, which is that perhaps Hyderabad as a city offers is more amenable to being imagined as a place, as a home, that where it's possible to think of actually attenuating one's ties to the village. Whereas in Delhi, I think it obviously happens. Many migrants have been able to set up a permanent home, quote unquote, in Delhi. But it's also the case that Delhi seems to be a fairly difficult city to stake out, that kind of security where you're willing to break from the village. In fact, coming back to this example of Ehsan, who says, right, in one of his quotes, that the village always remains with us, no matter where we are. I've gone to so many places, the village is always with me. He talks about it, ki dafan karne ke liye gaon mein to jayenge. But at the same time, he also makes this telling quote. He says, the 5 or 6% of people in the village who have perhaps really managed to make something of themselves, kuch ban paaye hain, are people who have actually managed to cut their ties to the village.
Are you planning to track these your respondents? Are you planning to track them back to the village?
Yes.
Yes.
It is the natural.
Brief answer, yes.
Thank you so much to the four of you. Thank you really for coming in and for this wonderful session of 2 hours and almost 2 hours and all. So thank you. It was very intense and great.
Thank you all for your questions. Yes.
And for all of you who want to go back to all those very rich debates, the video of this session will be online next month, so you can go through it. And we look forward to meet you for the next session, the last Tuesday of August. Thank you very much.